Hello everyone, I'm Charlie Winham. Welcome to LPB's first online field trip. Today we will visit Louisiana's wetlands and explore the many valuable resources they provide to us. We will also see how they are endangered by severe coastal erosion and how that contributes to the destruction of communities along the coastline and further inland. Additionally, we'll visit Jean Lafitte National Park to see what they are doing to protect the wetlands and the Acadian culture. Along the way, you'll learn how you can help protect our coastline and wetlands. Joining us today are Angela Rathley. Thank you so much for being here. She is a park ranger at Jean Lafitte Historic Park and Preserve. During our trip, we will see part of the preserve and talk about what they do there. Dr. Dearl Sanders from the LSU Ag Center, Idlewild Research Center, will talk about aquatic non-native species and the efforts to control them. And Michael Massamy is from the Barataria Terrebonne National Estuary Program, or BITNIP for short. BITNIP is not a national park, but it is a National Environmental Protection Program. We also will be taking your questions for our experts during this program. You can do it a couple of ways. You can give us a call at 1-888-767-7267 or click on the chat box to the right of the play button on the web page. We've got some great experts here, so please send in those questions. Our first question will go for Michael. Michael, let's make sure we all understand. What are wetlands?
Well, the answer is pretty simple. It's a land area that's wet sometimes. Mm-hmm. If it's flooded all of the time, it generally isn't going to stay that way for long. It's going to become open water, and that's not a wetland. And if it's never flooded, then it's just land. It's not a wetland at all. So it's an area that's flooded at least part of the year.
Can you give us an idea or a perspective of how much wetland is being lost?
Yes, we have an incredible problem here in southern Louisiana. It's the fastest disappearing landmass on Earth. We're losing about 25 square miles a year. That's equivalent to about a football field every 30 or 45 minutes. And here we have some animation. As time moves on, you see the land disappearing out from under us. This is not just the retreat of the coastline. This is actually marshes and wetlands and coastal areas literally just sinking away into the sea. So the sea ends up encroaching into the area.
Louisiana is sinking.
Louisiana is sinking, and it's a natural process. It's called subsidence. This is some of the youngest land on the planet. It was built just in the last few thousand years by the river depositing sediment. And as that sediment gets deposited and builds new land, it also naturally sinks. But to counteract that, we have new sediments falling into the wetlands. That's the natural process, but we've cut that off.
Looking at that map of Louisiana, I mean, the coastline could make its way all the way up to Baton Rouge.
Well, we hope that that doesn't happen, and that animation did show a projection into the future. Now, there's things that hopefully we can do to prevent that from happening.
Very good. Well, let's head out of the studio for a while, just a few minutes, and see some of this fascinating landscape Michael's been telling us about. We're going south to look at Louisiana's coastal wetlands.
For the last 30 years, I've worked in the environmental field. The last 10, I've been director of the Barataria Terrebonne National Estuary Program. The Barataria Terrebonne system, that area between the Mississippi River and the Atchafalaya River, is the fastest disappearing landmass on Earth. Unparalleled amount of wetland loss. That is the central issue that we must get a hold of. We need a place. Without the wetlands, we no longer have the place. We are sinking. The whole system is sinking. That includes the marshes, but it also includes the communities, the roads, the levees. The whole platform is sinking. It's just that the sediments that overtopped the banks before we had levees offset the sinking. We've cut canals, navigation canals, oil and gas canals, so we can get now hurricane storm surges that move far up into the system, into freshwater areas, and we get marsh die-off, swamp die-off, habitat loss. And now you have these storm surges hitting directly on hurricane protection systems that were built with healthy wetlands behind them. They were not built to endure storm surges without the wetlands. There have been a lot of us that have understood that we were completely vulnerable to hurricanes at a level unprecedented in our history. But it's not too late. We can still turn the tide on this whole wetland loss issue. We can restore it to a level that enables us to continue living here. Clearly, we need sediments. We need to look where the sediments are. We still are dredging at least 70 million cubic yards a year out of the Mississippi River. Currently, most of the sediment is discharged off the end of the continental shelf. It's completely wasted. We can harvest that. If we're going to dredge it, we can pump it through pipes into the shallow open water areas. Long-distance transport of sediments is done all over the world. This is well within our technological abilities. This will work. It's not the only strategy in the toolbox, but we still need shoreline protections. We still need small-scale water diversions from the Mississippi River. Still need vegetative replantings. We need to rebuild the barrier islands. This is a strategy that fits within our own plan. I just feel this load, this weight on my shoulders to make people understand. You know, we don't have decades to wait. We have to restore this system. Otherwise, we're going to see absolute tragic loss of a way of life that is nowhere else on earth.
A bounty of resources for generations. This place is the gift of natural forces. But those same forces, combined with man's attempt to control them, have left it vulnerable. Now, this delicate region is rapidly changing, and the scars left by the disintegrating landscape become more visible with each passing storm. The hurricanes that battered Louisiana in 2005 were not unique in their path or their strength. Other storms in years past did far less damage. This time, a fragile coast could not protect itself. 120 miles of coastline lost to open water, 780,000 displaced in Louisiana, 200,000 homes destroyed. And when statistics fail to capture the scale of the destruction, you have to focus on the individual losses, the human toll. Only then can you begin to grasp the enormity of this still unfolding tragedy.
Look at this. God, look at that. My name is Kerry St. Peg. I'm 55 years old. Grew up in Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana. Had a wonderful childhood. Grew up in a very close community. Could this be it? They said they was on the road and they had to push it down. I can't tell. The next lane is our whole lot. My dad and I built this foundation for the house. We did the piping with galvanized pipe. This is remnants of leftover pipe we had. But I don't recognize any of these houses. These are different houses. They don't belong here. But I can't believe, I don't even know where our house is. It's just gone. Impact of the storm has scattered everyone. You don't know how to reach people. We're all very, very close. We grew up with each other as far back as I can remember. I mean, I knew these people. And I went to school with Danny Delahousie. I lived right next door to him. It's been a real emotional thing to see so much hardship caused by these hurricanes. Places that we all grew up in, an idyllic childhood. Just almost wiped off the face of the earth and all those memories. We have to understand that we've lost so much of our wetlands that our communities are completely vulnerable. The wetlands we lost, the acres that we've lost within the last 30 years absolutely made a change. The acres we lost in the last 10 years made a big difference. We had severe hurricanes. Hurricane Betsy was always the one we always talked about. We weathered that pretty well. Years later, we weathered Camille pretty well. And as we've lost these wetlands and the barrier islands, we very definitely have seen that we can no longer weather the storms we once weathered. In fact, we've degraded to the point where even periods of sustained southerly winds are now flooding our roads, storms that don't even have names, flooding communities. All of us, everybody here, feels this emotional drain right now. And it's one of the things that just drives me. I mean, I feel like I am, whether I want it to be or not, I find myself as being an advocate for the hopes and dreams of thousands of people. And it's my obligation to become more vocal now. We live here, and the sense of urgency is felt most here by those of us who live here.
We are enjoying the questions coming in on this electronic field trip. So out of this story about hurricanes, our first question comes from William, a second grader from Zachary Elementary. How did Hurricane Katrina destroy so much over the marsh?
Well, the problem with big storms like Katrina is the storm surge. The winds and rain are one thing, but they literally lift up ocean water and bring it ashore as they come ashore. And that's what happened with Katrina, record storm surges. On the coast of Mississippi, they had up to 30 feet of storm surge. In Louisiana, almost that much. So the entire marsh is completely underwater and being swished about as that surge plows in over land. We lost about 200 square miles of land just from Katrina and Rita. That's almost 10 years worth of land loss in just one summer. My
goodness. Another question is Emmy, a third grader from Zachary Elementary as well. What makes a swamp and a marsh a marsh?
That's an excellent question. Both are types of wetlands, flooded part of the time. A swamp is a forested wetland with trees, mainly cypress and tupelo trees.
Okay.
And a marsh is a flooded grassland. So you won't see as many trees in a marsh. And there's several different types of marsh, from freshwater all the way down to the salt marshes near the coast. But swamps have trees, marshes have grasses.
Emmy, thank you. That was a great question. Emmy, a third grader from Zachary Elementary. Ranger Rathley, you're from a national park. And it's more than a park, it's Jean Lafitte National Park and Preserve. What is a preserve?
Well, I guess, too, let me say what's a park as well. A national park, there are over 370 in the country, and they preserve and protect for future generations, whatever. At Jean Lafitte, we have 6 sites. 5 of the sites is in Thibodaux, Lafayette, Eunice, and the French Quarter, and those are kind of cultural, where they talk about the people who live in Louisiana and their traditions. The preserve part of our park is Barataria Preserve. And that's 20,000 acres of swamp and hardwood forest. Well, it's about to be 26, I think, but it has marsh, it has swamp, so that part is preserve. And when we use the term preserve in the Park Service, that means we also allow traditional use. You can actually hunt at the Barataria Preserve. You can go and do traditional, gathering if you're a Native American. That kind of thing. So that's what we mean by preserve.
Plenty of indoor and outdoor activities you provide.
Yes, it's a great park. So, and all over, so no matter where you live in South Louisiana, you can catch one.
Very good. Let's put on our hiking shoes again and head over to the Barataria Preserve in Marrero and the Acadian Wetland Cultural Center in Thibodaux. The Jean Lafitte National Historical Park and Preserve harbors a wealth of ecological gems and rich cultural lore for patrons to discover as they set out on a trail to a different place and time. About 20 miles south of New Orleans at the Barataria Preserve, visitors encounter stunning flora and fauna, from levee forest to marsh, alligators to over 300 species of birds. The story of the region's history and ecology unfolds on ranger-guided tours. Park Ranger Ellen Rodriguez is our guide.
We're coming up to the confluence of where the Mississippi River, when she flowed through here, broke her own levee and created what's called a crevasse, a break. And when she did that, she created this bayou called Bayou Coquille, Bayou of the Shells. Bayou des Familles was named for the families that were settled in this area during the Spanish period. Most of them were isleños. They were islanders from the Canary Islands off the coast of Africa.
Some of the swamp's current residents are of a creepier variety.
You can see there's another one of those golden silks or banana spiders. About how old is this tree? This tree is about 300 years. All the trees in this region have dated to about 300 years. Now we're going to see one of the oldest cypress trees here in the preserve. We call her the monarch, and we estimate she's at least 700 years old. The reason why she wasn't removed when the rest of the big trees in this area were is because she splits. About 6 feet from the base, she actually splits in two, and that made her useless for lumber. So she was lucky enough to remain.
Human habitation and industry are not the only perils confronted by this ecosystem. Currently, non-native invasive species like water hyacinth and giant salvinia are suffocating her bayous.
We have just released giant salvinia weevils, which we're hoping will help control this invasive species to the point where the waterways can be open and viable for other aquatic life.
At 5 of the 6 John Lafitte National Historical Park and Preserve sites, campers learn about biodiversity and local culture through games, crafts, workshops, hikes, and hands-on activities such as water testing and dip netting in the summer months. Our last stop is a unique and fragile ecosystem. The flotant is a floating prairie marshland, the only one of its kind in the entire national park system found here at the Barataria site.
The Acadians, like many people who settled here in South Louisiana, had a major impact on the environment, and the environment equally had a major impact on their culture. Entire areas that were once enclaves of Acadian settlements are now being lost, and you're losing a way of life, you're losing a language, a culture, music. All of that is entailed in that land loss.
I was born and raised in Labradorville, which is about 8 miles from here. I spoke French from the time I was growing up till 6.5 years old. And then after that, when I went to school, I got my knuckles rapped many a time by the teacher because I couldn't talk English. So now they're paying people from Canada and France and so forth to teach French in the schools, which they tried to beat out of us when we were growing up.
Much has changed in Hamlin Landry's 84 years, but the Wetlands Acadian Cultural Center in Thibodaux is dedicated to preserving and shedding light on the fading cultures of this region.
I usually talk to some of the people who come from France, Canada, and other French-speaking parts of the world. I'm the semi-official French interpreter around here. I have been for the last 11 years.
Home to a museum featuring Acadian history and culture, the 200-seat Thibodaux Playhouse, and the Parish Library. The center's other claim to fame is the Delta Music Jam, an open mic jam session every Monday night.
We had unique music styles that grew up here that were nowhere else in the world at the time. Jazz, blues, Cajun, Zydeco, country music came on the scene. So we've had a real mixture of musical styles, and our music roots run very, very deep here.
Traditions carried through time by the bayou and its people.
We work very hard to preserve that knowledge and way of life. We offer classes given by local artisans and things like boat building so that you can build pirogues to go back on these wonderful waterways.
They wanted me to go out, but I just don't like to swim anymore. At my age, it's especially with clothes on and everything. I didn't know what was going to happen with the 2 young rangers and their girlfriends went out in here, and one of the little rangers told me that they had about 2 inches in a glass of water had seeped in, and then after that it quit. So evidently I did a pretty good job of putting it together.
You can also explore the region through art and learn painting techniques from artists like Dolores Lejeune.
I'm from Lancport, and I've been exhibiting here through the months of May, June, and July, and it's called the Cajun Bayou, Louisiana exhibit. Through my paintings, you can take a tour of the bayou.
We offer a myriad of programming to allow visitors to connect with this very special and unique place. We offer boat tours down Bayou Lafourche that travel both to the Edie White historic site and to Midwood Plantation so that they can get a taste of kind of a different way of life. The Barataria Preserve acts as an island for the biodiversity of the amazingly rich, dynamic system of the Delta region of the Mississippi River. The museums that are in Jean Lafitte National Historical Park and Preserve themselves act as miniature islands of culture that are disappearing as we watch both of these amazing things disappear. We are the stopgap to help preserve them and keep them for future generations to enjoy and learn about.
We hope you're enjoying this electronic field trip here on LPB, and we have questions coming in throughout the state from students. And my distinguished panel, I'm going to throw a few out here. An 8th grader, Blaine from Galvez Middle: should we be altering nature when we can't be really sure of the consequences? That's a pretty deep question.
It's an excellent question, and it's kind of what got us into some of these problems in the first place. We built levees all down the Mississippi River to prevent flooding, and that's a good thing, and it allowed people to move into these areas that typically would flood every year. But that had the unintended consequence of strangling the marsh and not allowing those sediments that renew the land back into the marsh.
Anybody else want to chime in? That sounds...
Well, you know, Michael was just saying it, but it's a working coast. People do live here, and they have to find that balance between working here and living here, and learn how to work with the system. And we'll talk about a little bit more in the houses and things like that, but it's important to realize everything you do has a change that it can make.
We did enjoy the field trip to the preserve. There's some interesting animals, creepy animals, as we discussed. The spider. What about that banana spider? A lot of questions are being asked about it.
Well, the banana spider sure looks kind of, creepy and scary, and of course with Halloween, it fits right in. But the golden orb spider, the banana spider, is pretty much very harmless. It's very large. It eats a lot of insects. It's great for the environment. If you have a lot of bugs around the house, it's a good thing to have.
Did I hear it possibly helps predict hurricanes?
Yeah, I haven't scientifically tested
exactly.
it, but it seems that when the banana spider a storm is coming or a front is coming, it will kind of disappear and leave its web and run for cover. So it can be an indicator.
That's very interesting.
But I want to let everybody know that it rarely bites, only more if you smash it or freak out or
relatively
something.
safe. If you're not too upset with it, it won't be too upset with you.
It's great to watch.
How large is the preserve?
The preserve is 20,000 acres of land. Well, that's the Barataria Preserve, and it's about to probably gain about 6,000 more acres due to some legislation. So of swamp, hardwood forest, you can walk through trails into, as you saw on the video footage.
Beautiful stuff. Dr. Sanders, if we may get you involved in this conversation, we saw in the park that non-native plants are quite a problem. You've worked to control some non-native plants in the wetlands. Remind us, what is a non-native plant, and is non-native the same as invasive?
Well, a non-native plant is one that didn't originate here. And there are a lot of examples of non-native plants. Most of the plants we grow in our vegetable gardens are non-native plants.
Okay.
But we don't consider them invasive. They're not taking over something else. An invasive plant is one that comes in from somewhere else and then displaces something that's already here. We have native vegetation, and these non-native plants that are invasive have the capability of crowding them out. They either use up all the food supply or push them out. I kind of relate it to the uninvited guest that comes over and eats everything in your refrigerator and sleeps in your bed and forces you out of your house. And that's what these all are. And across the front here, we've got a number of these. And to expand on the student from Galvez Middle, all of these plants, which are non-native invasives here, were actually introduced by people with good intention. They thought that they were doing something positive, and their unintended consequences are such that now we spend millions of dollars trying to erase that.
Can you tell us about some of these plants you brought in?
Sure. Kind of historically in perspective, these plants were introduced from over the last 150 years into the state. This is water hyacinth, and most of the students will probably recognize it. It's spread throughout the state. It actually was introduced at the Cotton Exposition in 1886 from China. It has a very pretty lavender flower, and as a gift, people attending the what at the time was a World's Fair would receive a little glass bowl with a water hyacinth plant in it, and they would take it back and put it in their pond. Unintended consequences. In a single year, they were able to spread water hyacinth from California to the east coast of the United States. We spray about 200,000 acres in the state each year at about $2.5 million just to try to correct that problem.
My goodness.
Water lettuce. This one was introduced about 1900. It looks like a floating head of cabbage. Unfortunately, it's not edible. It was introduced as in the water garden trade as an ornamental. This is common salvinia. It's a diminutive plant. It's a problem in disrupting waterfowl resources. It's somewhere between a problem and a nuisance. But unfortunately, it's related to
a much bigger problem.
A lake killer. This is giant salvinia versus common salvinia. This one's 100 times bigger. This one is the one that we're fighting most intently right now. It has the capability of killing a lake. It grows from shoreline to shoreline, as it has in Lake Bistineau in northwest Louisiana, in some of the marsh that we're familiar with at the preserve. It cuts out all sunlight. It cuts out all oxygen production. The fish that are trapped there, the mollusks, the crustaceans die, or they flee. And all that's left is sterile water and this one plant.
Students want to know, we're getting questions coming in from our students all across Louisiana, what can they do to help?
Well, obviously, if they see a plant that is out of place, which is a good definition of a non-native invasive plant. If they see something they don't recognize, it's never been there before, and it's spreading and expanding. And there may be something next week that shows up. These things happen all the time. Contact the local county agent, or contact the local representative of Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, or in South Louisiana, the U.S. Army Department Corps of Engineers. They are tasked with keeping unwanted plants out of the way. So that's the first step.
We're going to take another student question, and I'm going to look at one, but while we're doing that, what can help eradicate this?
Well, the state, mostly the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries in the southern, all through the northern part of the state, has a concerted spray program using herbicides to control all these aquatic weeds. The problem arises in that, in the case of the water hyacinth here, the control cost about $8 an acre. With the giant salvinia, the control may be as high as $500 an acre. So you've got over a 200-fold increase. It just becomes cost prohibitive. There's not enough money to do it. The other thing that we've done, and we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, we've tried several biocontrol applications on controlling these weeds. That's where you use some other living organism to control the plant. And there is a huge effort underway now using a salvinia weevil, which was mentioned in the video, to try to help stop the giant salvinia.
And that's still in its basic, the initial stages, trying to see if it does help or not?
We're in our third year of releases. It has been successful in certain areas. It has been successful in areas on Toledo Bend. We're just putting a lot of resources now into growing weevils and transporting them around and transplanting them onto sites.
That's very encouraging. We're going to go to some more questions from you, the students out there. Megan, an 11th grader from Loyola, has the coast of Louisiana been eroding longer than humans have inhabited the area? If so, how far could have the coast extended in the Gulf of Mexico?
That is a really good question. I might have mentioned earlier, we're sitting on some of the youngest land, geologically speaking, in the world. The river, just over the last few thousand years, has created the delta, and it's transporting sediment from the continent. It drains half the continent practically and deposits that sediment. Pretty much everything below Lake Pontchartrain in southeast Louisiana is new land created by this sediment. So the river switches course, it finds a new route to the sea, it builds a delta lobe here, that erodes. It might change course and build a delta lobe here, and then that erodes away too. So it's a constant give and take. It's not that the coastline was much, much larger before and now it's so small. It's that it's constantly changing, getting bigger here, smaller here, bigger here, smaller there. The problem is we've cut off that process. It's not getting bigger anywhere anymore. It's just getting smaller.
We want to thank you all for those questions. We're starting to run out of time with our field trip here. So before we wrap things up, I want to make sure you all have a few seconds because we are running out of time. Tell us what types of programs that are out there for school kids.
Well, the Jean Lafitte Park in the French Quarter, in Barataria, in Thibodaux, and in Lafayette offer camps that kids can go and actually do participate in hands-on. They can go out into the marsh, they can take field trips. We work with BITNIP on that, and so there's places they can go and learn more. We have a festival coming up. Michael, you want to?
Yeah, BITNIP, we do a lot. We have a very robust volunteer program for kids and adults can come participate in beach sweeps, invasive species removal, cleanups, trail clearing, that sort of thing.
That's wonderful.
And we do have a festival coming up at the park in Thibodaux, Ecological Festival, our Fête d'écologie, where we have music and food and cultural crafters, and also featuring a Nutria fur fashion show, which is a whole other issue.
September 26th.
September 26th.
Saturday.
That is wonderful. Our next trip is a short one, and it brings us to the wetlands and back in time to learn about some nutria history. So let's watch.
In Louisiana, back in the late 1930s, the family that makes Tabasco hot pepper sauce began raising an animal from Argentina called a nutria.
The McElhenney family, like others in the state, hoped the fur from the animal would be a big seller. But nutria farming wasn't easy, and some owners gave up, releasing their nutria into the state's wetlands. And at the McElhenney's famous jungle gardens, a tropical storm blew through, bringing more nutria into the nearby swamps. The nutria population quickly increased and began feeding on marsh vegetation and burrowing into drainage canals, threatening cave-ins of earthworks and embankments, wrecking the place.
Well, what is being done to control nutria? Michael, let's throw that question to you.
Well, the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries has a program using funding from Coastal Restoration Program, the BRO Act, and they pay hunters and trappers a bounty for each tail from a nutria that they collect. Basically, it's an incentive to get trappers out into the marsh to bring them in. When the price of fur collapsed and nobody wanted fur anymore, nobody trapped nutria anymore, so they ran crazy. And now, so this is an incentive to try to get the trappers back out there collecting nutria.
Okay. I forget, I think a couple of years ago it was $4, so either for a tail.
It was a $4 bounty program, and it was very successful, and now it's up to $5.
Up to $5 now. Maybe you kids out there might be able to find a way to earn an extra $1 or two. Michael, you're from the Barataria Terrebonne Estuary. What is an estuary?
Well, an estuary is, simply put, it's an area where rivers and lakes meet the sea. It's where freshwater and saltwater mix. And this mixing of habitat types and water chemistries make estuaries some of the most productive areas on the planet.
Let's see. Let's go back to some more questions from the kids because they are excellent questions. I'm just going to take one from Katie. Katie is a junior at Loyola College Prep. Are there any species or methods that could be used to prevent and hinder the growth of salvinia? I think we did touch a little bit about that, but once again, there's the weevil that does some...
We have looked at a variety of control measures involving other creatures. We tried grass carp. Grass carp simply would rather starve to death than eat giant salvinia.
Is this inedible?
Essentially, it is inedible. It has a metabolic inhibitor in it that if you eat enough of it, it will make you sick. So the grass carp are fairly bright animals. Mm-hmm. They figured out pretty soon if they ate any more of it, they were going to get sick, so they quit. The only thing that we know that consumes it to a control level is the salvinia weevil.
Okay.
And we have a major effort underway running nursery sites to grow this little creature you see here. It came from the same place that the salvinia came from southern Brazil. It's about a quarter to so inch long. And when the numbers get high enough, it greatly reduces the population of salvinia.
I'm going to go to another question here for our LPB electronic field trip. This one comes from Hayden. Is nutria causing the most damage to wetlands, or are other animals also causing damage? He is a fifth grader from Chafunkta Middle School.
Well, as animals go, the nutria is probably definitely the worst. But other natural processes and man-made processes cause a lot more damage to the wetlands than nutria do. But as animals go, yeah, that's definitely the worst one.
One more question. Mary Haynes, a seventh grader from Monteleone Junior High, can we use the nutria to help control the plants that are harming the wetlands? That's amazing speed here for this. This is a great electronic field trip.
I'll take that one. The nutria don't consume floating plants.
Okay.
So they're eating the plants that are on the flooded soils, the grasses and sedges and stuff that are on dry land part of the time. So they avoid these, and of course in the case of salvinia that's slightly toxic, they're going to avoid that at all cost.
Ranger Angela, let's talk about the wetlands and what draws people there. How do they manage to survive in the area that you live and work in?
I heard a great quote once. He was a Native American gentleman, Mr. Kirby Verrett, and he said, "You can't go hungry in Louisiana unless you're on a diet." And when the Cajuns started settling here and other people in the colonial period, Louisiana is a very hot but very rich environment. That estuary system where everything's coming together provides a lot of food. And so South Louisiana was a good place for folks to live, and they learned to live very much off the land.
Very good. Well, thank you so much for all of your time for this electronic field trip. I think the students out there, I hope you've enjoyed an opportunity to talk with some experts on a very important subject to Louisiana residents and school kids. So I want to thank you all so much for being part of this LPB field trip.
Thank you
very much.
Thank
you. We have links to lots of helpful web resources. All you need to do is go to lpb.org. Thanks to our wonderful experts, Angela Rathly Rodriguez, Dr. Dearl Sanders, Michael Massamy, and thank you to all the students for joining LPB's field trip. For all those who did not get their questions answered, we will be posting more questions and answers on our website. Since this is our first field trip, please let us hear back from you with all your comments and suggestions. Write us at edtv@lpb.org. For LPB's field trips, this is Charlie Winham wishing you safe travels.